Welcome to the first lecture of the course Special Institute Creativity and Innovation. And we start with looking at approaches to both creativity and innovation. Now, one of the first questions I'd like to ask usually is not what is the definition of creativity or what is the definition of innovation, but where do we look for creativity? And conversely, where we don't look for creativity, where we assume that there is no creativity or innovation to be found. I like to start with this question because it does raise interesting questions around what we associate with creativity. So, for instance, in this on this slide, you can see Albert Einstein. Obviously, great creators, famous creators are typically come to mind quite quickly. You can see in the corner top left the signed urinal of Duchamp. We can argue whether that is actually creative or not, but it is in a museum nonetheless. And also on the top, you can see the brain. A lot of people today are trying to understand the neuroscience of creativity and innovation and how we get creative ideas by looking at neurological processes. But in the down part, you also see everyday life interactions, like in the classroom or preparing a meal at home. And indeed, today more and more we think of creativity as a very democratic and kind of widespread type of phenomenon. All of us create to some extent. You don't have to be an Einstein to be a creative person. But it is interesting, and what we're going to do in this class is to understand what is the historical link, what are the historical roots of all of these ideas, which come from very different stories. Now, if we start though with a definition, I am a psychologist. Psychology has been studying intensively the phenomenon of creativity, and in psychology, creativity appears as different things. So people look at it as a trait, a personality trait, something that is quite stable, as a process, especially a cognitive process, a thinking process, a gift, and there is a big literature on giftedness nowadays, an aptitude or skill, what people can do. So, for instance, they can think divergently, they can associate ideas quickly, and so on. But also as an attitude towards life, towards other people, a creative attitude, an open attitude, open towards novelty. Indeed, the definition we use in psychology is very much a product definition. So creativity is seen as the process leading to the emergence of both novelty and originality on the one hand, and some kind of value on the other. The question is, what is the difference between something being new and something being original? Imagine you're in a factory and you look at it's kind of a chain of mechanical reproduction that creates chairs. Yeah. So at the end of that chain, you'll always have a new chair being put together. At the same time, are those chairs original? If they're the exact replica of other existing chairs, then they're not original. So novelty is what came into being now, and many things are new, but not many things are necessarily original, which means something that did not exist before or is quite different from what existed before is rare. Then if you look at or think about value, here we have interesting associations between creativity, innovation, and especially economic value, producing economic value. But it would be quite restrictive to think of creativity only in this manner. So for instance, when children are being creative, when they draw or sing or play, nothing of exact economic value is being produced, but rather what we're looking at in terms of creativity is a kind of appropriateness, a kind of significance or meaningfulness of the act. Children playing might not produce economic value, but they do something very meaningful in terms of their own development. And another big question, of course, has to do with the relation between creativity and innovation. Throughout this course, I'm going to use these concepts almost as synonyms, but obviously there are some differences. So in this quote from Anderson and colleagues, in the context of work, they look at creativity and innovation as a process, outcomes, and products of attempts to develop and introduce new and improved ways of doing things. You can notice new and improved which were the two criteria I mentioned before: novelty, originality on the one hand, and value, utility, appropriateness, improvement on the other. The creativity stage of the process, the authors say, refers to idea generation, and innovation to the subsequent stage of implementing ideas towards better procedures, practices, or products. Creativity and innovation can occur at the level of the individual, work team, organization, or more of these levels. So they're both systemic phenomena. But the core of this quote has to do with this difference between creativity seen as the initial stage of an innovation process, when people get ideas, so idea generation. You can be reminded here of how the light bulb, the lit light bulb, is often seen as a symbol of creativity. And then you have innovation, which has to do with implementing ideas, with turning them into reality, making them happen. This distinction is quite interesting and important, and it's good for you to know about it, but it's also good to think critically about this distinction, because if you're like me, for instance, you get some of your best ideas and most creative ideas when you're actually implementing ideas, when you're doing something, you're turning things into reality in some ways. So rather than thinking of creativity and innovation as two stages, one at the beginning, one towards the end, it's much better to look at the cyclical interaction or the cyclical relationship between them. And if we think about creativity, it's also important to look at the long history of this term. Although in science we've been studying creativity and innovation for very few decades, we have been creative and innovative as a species for millennia and hundreds of thousands of years, actually, if we look at a species level. In antiquity, very much some of the first ideas about creativity came from what's called this paradigm of divine inspiration. So the first associations with creativity were with God or the gods or the muses, or in Greek Roman antiquity, the muses and Pegasus, the winged horse. And the fact that creativity comes from the outside and comes from the above, in a way, it's something transcending the creator, and the creator is actually filled with this inspiration, divine inspiration. So creativity is God's gift, but also creativity as God's punishment. So if you look at this plate, you can see on the right side Prometheus and the vulture of Zeus, and then Zeus on the left side, and the vulture is very unkindly eating the liver of Prometheus. But don't worry, he's a titan, so he survives. He's actually being punished for eternity, because what Prometheus did was give fire from gods, give fire to mankind. Fire is a very interesting metaphor, the creative spark, isn't it? Creative insight. So basically, he gave creativity to people. Not only gods were creative. But here you have a warning sign from this legend of Prometheus. Don't be too creative. Don't break the norms too much, or punishment will follow. And if you think about it, this is how we tend to look at creativity innovation today as well. Not as something that will bring divine wrath and Zeus's vulture necessarily, but as something that we are fascinated by, but we also fear a little bit. So if you look at classrooms and organizations, you'll notice that a lot of people do want more creative employees and students and teachers and so on. But at the end of the day, they actually fear the level of disruption this kind of creativity would bring. Moving on in the very brief history of creativity I'm presenting here, the Renaissance is another very important moment, because during the Renaissance is when, instead of gods being the prototypical creator, each and every person became endowed with the capacity to create. So if you think about Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo and others, you see the birth of the author, the fact that people are creative, not only exclusively gods. So individualizing creativity, making it something an individual possesses, is very much an idea coming from the Renaissance, at least in the West. Moving forward, during the Enlightenment, it was an era of reason and conquering nature and problem solving and scientific discovery. And this is where creativity plays a great part in innovation, because this is, creative problem solving, creative insights. All of them have their origin, and we're so concerned with them from the Enlightenment onwards. The image of the creative genius as an inventor comes from there. But obviously, we don't only think about creative people as inventors, as discoverers, or mathematicians. Actually, most of the time, we tend to think of creators as artists. And this is the romantic legacy and the romantic ideal. Romanticism, if you remember, was responding to the over rationality of the Enlightenment and bringing back messiness, the unconscious, and even madness to the image of what it means to be a creative person. And until today, we still carry these associations of creativity. But what happens today? Well, Einstein is putting his tongue out. In today's times, which many people consider late modern, postmodern, high modernity, and so on, creativity has and innovation have yet a different dynamic to them. It's an era of connectivity. It's an era of communication, of having access to culture. So here is an example of pop art. If you think about YouTube, if you think about the way we express ourselves creatively today, we take bits and pieces of culture and we constantly mix and remix them. So today, instead of thinking of the creative genius of the Enlightenment, and Renaissance, and Romanticism, we actually have a different way of looking at creators as people who combine and communicate and mix and match different aspects of culture. Now, towards the end, I'm going to make a bit of a summary or try to organize this long history. And when I start looking at creativity and innovation, of course, there is a growing literature in the field. And the way I found useful to put some order into this literature was to think about three types of paradigms. So the he paradigm, the I paradigm, and the we paradigm. Each one of them has its own definitions, forms of measurement, and its distinct implications for theory, research, and practice. Now, when I say paradigm, what I actually mean is a cluster of beliefs. It's not only a scientific paradigm, but it's the way we think and the way we do creativity and innovation that come together in a specific way. So the he paradigm, the reason I call it he is not out of any sexism, but actually to point to the ideological construction of what we mean by genius, because the he paradigm is the paradigm of the genius. It is historically has been the case, and sadly even today, that men's creativity has been recognized and not women's creativity very much. So the way we construct the genius prioritizes a certain gender and a certain social class, and this is something that we have to be aware of, and more we're challenging today. Now, the genius is something obviously we're still fascinated by. It is a very individualizing look at creativity because it really points you to the creative person. Who is that person who is a genius? Well, most of the times it's someone who has high eminence, a high level of IQ, so high intelligence. It's also someone who achieves revolutionary, creates revolutionary products or has revolutionary achievements. So some historical form of creativity. This is who the genius is. It's transforming society and culture. On the downside, of course, the paradigm of the genius, the he paradigm, tends to be quite essentialist because it looks for the essence of genius. Where does genius reside? Is it in the brain? Is it in the personality structure? Is it in the intelligence level, and so on? And it is quite exclusive because the moment you think of creativity and innovation in terms of genius level performance, you're probably not assuming that you or people you know are necessarily geniuses, unless you have a very high level of self-esteem. But normally this is not a very inclusive type of approach. If you think of geniuses as creative, then probably you're not inclined to say that you are a creative person. Then it proposes an image of disconnection between the creator on the one hand and society and culture on the other. The creator has to fight his or her culture and society and the norms of its own time. But obviously, as we know, including from the stories like that of Van Gogh, that is very much used to say that, look, geniuses are misunderstood. They're ahead of their time. Their culture does not understand them. We have to remember that people like Van Gogh were understood and appreciated by, for instance, his brother, Theo, by Gauguin and other painters from the Impressionist group. So they still worked within a culture and within a society. If I am to give a kind of a metaphor, a visual metaphor to this paradigm, would be to look at Rodin's sculpture, The Thinker. It's male. It's alone, solitary, deep in thought. So this brain power, high eminence. This seems to me like a good visual metaphor for the he paradigm. The I paradigm is where we are today in many ways. It's the paradigm of the creative individual. Each and every person is creative, or at least has creative potential. The way of looking at creativity proposed by the I paradigm is much more democratic because, as I said, everyone can be creative, but it's not much more social because it's still each and every person separately or in isolation being creative. Creativity is considered both as a kind of potential, so you have the potential to be creative even if you didn't make something creative, which is called creative achievement. So everyone has creative potential, but not necessarily creative achievement. This paradigm started very much in psychology. In 1950, Guilford gave an address to the American Psychological Association where he promoted that creativity should be studied by psychologists as the form of creative personality and looking at creative cognition, divergent thinking, and so on. So the language of the I paradigm is very much focused on the individual, on cognition and psychological features. And that's why it is grounded also in psychometrics, or the measurement of the psychic, yes, tests and scales of creativity. In this week, you have the exercise that introduces you to different ways of measuring creativity. And you'll notice there that it can be measured as divergent thinking, as creative insight, and so on and so forth. So finding a way to quantify creativity at an individual level means that you can correlate it with other individual attributes. Level of intelligence, type of motivation, personality profile. So then you build a very psychological profile of creativity. But here is a visual metaphor for it. I like to look at this as the cubicle culture of today in organizations where people, they all can be creative, but they're creative on their own, separate a bit from others. If you look at how testing is done, you actually test individuals alone and you give them a score. And we don't look as much at interaction and collaboration. This is the essence of the we paradigm. It's both a new and old paradigm. It's new because it kind of emerged in science from the 70s and 80s onwards, and today is quite powerful as a discourse. But it is also has very old roots, even in the way we thought about genius, actually in antiquity, because I started the history from there. Genius loci was the protective spirit of the family, of the place. It wasn't really one person. So the essence of the we paradigm, both then and now, is the idea of focusing on the person in context. It's not only the individual. Of course, we can never forget the importance of the person in creativity, but it is the person in its context. The unit of analysis becomes not the individual alone, the individual mind, or even the creative product, but the relations and interactions and forms of communication between creator and what is being produced, creators and audiences, and so on. Creativity and innovation appear not only as psychological, but as psycho, socio, and material forms of action. So they depend on social interaction and depend on the use of material tools, which is something we obviously all do and know about. The emphasis is on collaboration, on developing systemic models, meaning models that look beyond the person and look at the system behind creativity and innovation, and developmental models, meaning that you look at the system as it evolves over time. Now, one of the emblematic images for this that I like very much is, it's not San Francisco, it's actually in Lisbon, in Belém. It's a big sculpture of a ship. You here have one part of it, the front part of the ship, where you have a person in front actually carrying a smaller version of that ship. I think it is Henrik the Navigator, that's what I've been told. Might be wrong. But the reason I'm presenting this to you is because it's one of the very few sculptures I've seen where it's not only the creator, it's not only the one individual being celebrated, like the way we build monuments today and statues, it's only the one person, or the way we give awards, very often it's for one individual alone. Here you can see what makes visible is this network of collaboration and other people supporting and contributing to this big discovery, big achievement of the person we look at mostly. Of course, there are limitations. All of these guys are men. You can see merchants and priests and soldiers and so on. But it is a step forward towards acknowledging the system behind creators. So what I tried to argue in this brief introduction was that creativity and innovation have a short scientific past, but a very long history, and they're part of actually our history as a species. We arguably became human the moment we started to create things and to accumulate these things, so to build culture through them. There are at least three paradigmatic ways of looking at creativity. I propose the he paradigm of the genius, the I paradigm of the creative individual, and the we paradigm of creative collaboration. You have in this class, under activities, three resources that unpack in turn something about genius, something about each and every individual being creative, and also the value of co-creation and collaboration. Finally, these different paradigms have their own conceptual ways of defining creativity, innovation, methodological implications, but also practical and ethical consequences. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned for the he paradigm, if you adopt a view of creativity that reduces it to high level of achievement and to certain individuals and not others, you're actually disempowering a large portion of the population, and you're making them consider themselves less creative. So the definitions we use of creativity innovation have deep implications, not only for how these phenomena are, but for how we discover them, how we identify them, but also how we cultivate them, both in ourselves and in other people.